Well, thank you for having me here. I'm pleased to participate in this forum hosted by Normal and the Muleskinners. I'm aware of Normal. I've attended their
No,
events here in Columbia.
wait a minute. This is not normal. It's
Uh,
this is Muleskinners, only Muleskinners.
oh, I'm sorry. I thought this was.
No,
I must have been misread the email then. I'm sorry. Regardless, I'm pleased to be here with Muleskinners and um, thank you for having me. I'm Glenn Nielsen. I'm a longtime libertarian, as you mentioned. I've been a resident of Columbia for 37 years. I originally came here after serving in the U.S. Navy to work on the operations staff at the Callaway nuclear plant, and found I had an aptitude for computer programming, started my own computer software development business, and eventually ended up working for the university to help bring the internet to Missouri. A longtime libertarian. I've been active in this community. Some of you, I think, know me and know of me. I've participated in dozens of city council meetings. I've spoke on issues in front of the city council, such as the smoking ban, eminent domain, and the citizen review board for the police. I've also participated at the state level. I have, in 2003, I was appointed to then Secretary of State Matt Blunt's special committee to provide recommendations on the Help America Vote Act, which was implemented to try to modernize the voting equipment after the 2000 election with the hanging chads. I also was state chair of the Missouri Libertarian Party, and at that time I attended and testified at a number of state legislative committee hearings. And so I've been active in this community. And then some of you may be familiar with libertarianism, some of you may not. So I will give a quick overview of libertarianism. There's a libertarian political party, but there also is the philosophy of libertarianism, which boils down to basically what you learn in preschool. You know, don't hit other kids and don't take their stuff, or the golden rule, you know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. At a more technical level, the philosophy is the non-aggression principle. That is, that you may not, individuals or groups may not initiate force or violence or threat of force or theft or fraud against others. And then with that, there is property right. The ultimate property right being that you own your own body. And not only do you own your own body, but you can choose what you want to do with your own body, an extension to your personal effects and any real property that you might own. And then the third principle of libertarianism are free markets, so that you should be able to make agreements or deals or barter or do business freely in the market without any interference from anyone else, as long as you don't violate the non-aggression principle. And next I'll get to why am I running? Why am I running for this seat? This is the first time I've actually run for elective office. Part of that reason is that while I worked for the university, I was restricted in running for office. You would have to take a leave of absence to do that. But the major reason I'm running is the disruption to our society in the last year. I was encouraged to finally see a national movement of popular unrest, of protest regarding the police abuse and the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. And this is not anything new. It's been going on for a long time. And it's encouraging to see that finally there seems to be momentum towards actually making change. And I would like to make sure that a libertarian voice is included in that discussion, because there are a lot of things that can be done to reform the criminal justice system, not just police abuse, but from all the way from the top to the bottom, not just police, but also the courts, prison reform, on and on. And then next was the disruption to the economy caused by the fear of the COVID-19 and by the actions of government to restrict the freedoms of the individuals. That has created a great disruption to our economy. If you drive around Columbia, you can see so many for lease signs in businesses that had been open a little bit over a year ago. So we need to take action to encourage those businesses to get open again and improve the economy of Missouri. Because the economic toll for this hasn't, you know,
Didn't see her.
hasn't finished yet. And I think my time is up. So thank you so much for having me here. And I look forward to having this discussion with David.
Okay, now, Mr. Smith, your turn.
Absolutely. And thank you, Leslie, for moderating. And I just want to thank the Muleskinners for having me. It's good to be back. And I appreciate the work you've done in this city, and you do basically around the clock, making sure that the citizens know what's going on and you fight for what's right for this great town of ours. And I want to thank Glenn Nielsen for for joining the forum. It's nice to see you, Glenn, and I appreciate you participating. So for those of you who know, my name is David Tyson Smith. I grew up here in Columbia, went to Hickman, graduated from Hickman, and I went to the University of Missouri. I graduated from Mizzou, and then I went to Tulane Law School. And I was planning on coming back right after that, but I got an opportunity to work in Louisiana suing tobacco companies, and they were doing some awful things back then, and they still are. And so I decided to work downtown New Orleans at a firm that exclusively was a plaintiff's firm, and so I got to see a lot of the corporate greed that went on with, I mean, unbelievable things you'd normally see in films about, you know, memos and documents that, you know, where these corporate companies are trying to deceive the citizens just for profit. It was really disgusting. So I was glad to kind of wear the white hat down there and take on big tobacco. But, you know, the call to Columbia was strong, and I came back, and this is my hometown. It's a great city. And so I started a law firm about 15 years ago, Smith & Parnell. And so we do criminal defense is one of the things we do, personal injury, and we do family law. And so that's been great to just help everyday people who are caught up. You know, you talk about the justice system, who are caught up in the justice system. And it's gotten even worse, just so everyone knows. I mean, the fact that you see a lot of younger people getting charged with crimes, felonies they shouldn't be charged with. You know, years ago, even in school, they might have got reprimanded, suspended for a fight. Now they get charged with a felony. I just recently, just this week, represented a young man. I was fortunate to get his case dismissed, who was a very minor issue on campus, dealing with some property issues, and he got charged with the crime, and it was silly. I got that dismissed just, like I said, a few days ago or yesterday. So I've enjoyed that work. I was also, for those of you who know, I was involved in the Citizens Police Review Board. So we led the effort for that back in 2006 to 2009. You know, there's a lot of excessive force going on with the police. The police were not accountable. I know Carl was involved in that with the council back then. And so, you know, we led the fight. A lot of people said it couldn't be done. You know, at the time, Chief Bateman had been in power for over 20 years or around that time. And it's not like now we have different chiefs of police and there's all these groups on the ground that are doing different things. I mean, you know, you had the ACLU, of course, and you know, the Human Rights Commission was, I mean, I was there, which still is, but so it was like a daunting task. And people said that it was going to be impossible. So we were able to get that established. Now, the board still needs some work, obviously, where it's not, you know, it still needs to be tweaked and there's some issues there, but I think it was a good start. In 2017, I was appointed to the Missouri Advisory Committee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights. So I've enjoyed serving the citizens at the federal level on civil rights issues. And interestingly enough, you know, our charge the last 6 months plus, even I would say even a year now, was voting leading up to the election. So we heard from, you know, Ashcroft, and, you know, it's a bipartisan committee, but the Commission on Civil Rights is bipartisan as well. So we heard from a bipartisan group about voting. An interesting point, this is for another time, but, you know, we never really heard I didn't hear a lot about voting fraud or problems that were going to cause the overturn of election from a bipartisan group, Democrats and Republicans. We were briefed from people all over the country, and yet it was only coming out of the Trump White House that there's some type of voter fraud. And the advisory committee is supposed to report to Congress and the president about what's going on. So that was interesting to see that, and to see that, you know, we weren't hearing about a massive voting fraud even from Republicans leading up to the election. These are experts in the field. So I'm glad to run. I'm excited to run. Missouri's in a state of crisis from attacks on the nonpartisan Missouri plan to pick judges, LGBTQ plus rights we've seen on news. I mean, MSNBC's picked up testimony from what's going on in Jeff City. Medicaid expansion is under fire. Voter suppression is unbelievable. I mean, I haven't seen bills like this. I can't, not only statewide, but nationally. School choice, they're trying to fund private schools, take away money from public schools. So thank you, I'm glad to be here.
Okay, and now we'll, again, because we took a lot of time before they spoke, please limit your questions to just 30 seconds and forget the commentary. All right, anybody want to ask a question? I see a hand, and if I can't see your picture, just call out or put it in the chat. All right, is there a hand up? I can't see a hand. Who? Oh, Carl. Okay, Carl.
Yeah, just a question. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the issue of preemption. It's a national problem. It's also, I think, a state problem. This issue, and Pam introduced some of those kinds of things. I mean, public health and so on. How do you feel about the idea of preemption and local control from your two different political perspectives?
Okay, well, Mr. Smith, you will go first, and you have up to 2 minutes to answer.
Okay, thank you. That's another problem we've got right now with these slew of bills that are coming down. What the state is trying to do is to take away local control, and I think we need local control here, especially when you're dealing with, Crowley mentioned, health departments and all these other issues. So we need to fight against this onslaught, especially here in Columbia. And I think we're in a unique spot here because we're supposed to be, kind of a blue county or blue area in a sea of red. And then yet we've got the legislature. And so, and people are very active here. I think people in Columbia are involved. They know what they want. We have a very active citizenry, which is great, and in electing, local officials, city council, school board, or whatnot. So I think that people here, and we're educated, right? I mean, we know what we're doing. And so for the state to come in and try to usurp local authority on all kinds of issues, whether it's trash, with the health department bills saying that now you can get, potentially you can expand the shutdown of certain businesses, but then you have to get, city council approval if you're going to do that. So I think we need to maintain local control. I'm a big proponent of local control. Not only that, but as you know, Missouri ranks at the bottom as far as COVID vaccine distribution, right? So we need to make sure that our local health departments have control and get out these vaccines to the people in our community. And we're in a unique spot here in Columbia because we have hospitals here, right? We're not just like any other county. And so we've got people coming into Columbia to go to the hospital, have COVID issues, and that affects our families and our communities, especially with school being in session. So we want to make sure that our health departments have local control to make sure that everything's taken care of. We can't trust the state. I mean, this is a state government that just recently voted against a statewide mask mandate. So this state government cannot be trusted, with the governor on down. So we need to maintain local control.
Thank you. And Mr. Nielsen.
Thank you. I'm for local control, but there also need to be checks and balances because you can have tyrants at the state level and tyrants at the federal level, but you can also have tyrants at the local level. So I think you need to have adequate checks and balances. And speaking of that, I think the state of Missouri also can preempt federal law. And you see an example of that in the states right now. The most prominent example of that is those laws for medical marijuana or actually legalized marijuana. They are preempting federal law where marijuana is still a Schedule I drug. So I am for local control all the way down to the individual. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, any other questions? Herb.
Each of you expressed interest in a broad range of issues in your opening statements. In addition to that, would you identify for us specific policy proposals which are before the council or you expect to be before the council?
They're state. They're going to state.
the state, yes, 45th district, the state legislature, which you would like to take an especially vigorous part in opposition or support?
Hey, Mr. Nielsen, you go first this time.
Well, thank you. I have some ideas regarding criminal justice reform that I would like to put forward. I think that aren't commonly thought of. The first one is that in the state of New Hampshire, traffic enforcement is done solely for a safety reason. And any violations or fines that are paid go to the general fund of the state legislature rather than to the local police or the local community. What this does is it changes incentives so that law enforcement is doing traffic stops for safety reasons rather than for generating funding. And I think that can also extend to the cities, the municipalities. There was a study done by the Show Me Institute that showed that some of the suburbs around the city of St. Louis were generating more than 30% of their revenue from fining their own citizens. And I think you need to remove the incentive for people to be fined, which is oppressive, by having those funds go to the General Assembly to distribute, so that the enforcement of ordinances and traffic laws are done solely for safety and health purposes and not to generate revenue.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Smith?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. You know, it's interesting because, and I thank you for the question, Harv, there are so many things going on right now that you can almost pick any one of them. I mean, there's so much pushback that needs to be done right now in Jefferson City on so much legislation. I don't know where to start, but primarily one of my main concerns as far as pushing back, I think, because so much is kind of cascading down upon us, is the voter suppression. This is a new battleground, and I think battlefront moving forward. The majority has identified, and they've said it specifically. It's not, you know, in the old days where things just happened and, you know, you wonder why they did it. They're specifically saying they know that if they can keep people from voting, then they're going to maintain power. And so just a slew of bills that are coming down, we have to push back against those. You know, before the forum started, maybe Leslie, it was you had mentioned, or I think someone had mentioned about the ballot initiative process, even stopping that. I mean, these new bills to make it difficult to initiate ballot initiative petitions. I mean, that's what led to Medicaid expansion, right? So we need to push back against that. So that's, to me, that's going to be the paramount issue moving forward, not just for this term, the next one, and even further than that is this voter suppression, making it difficult for people to vote. So we need to fight against that. There's some great crime bills that are moving through right now. Senator Williams, state senator, and seizing on the momentum of what happened this summer, has a crime bill that's going to ban no-knock warrants, ban chokeholds. I think it's great. I'm going to support that. We're both going to be on a Capitol forum together, I think not this Saturday, but next Saturday. And I'm sure he's going to be talking about that. And that's getting bipartisan support. You know, one of the things about criminal justice reform, and I've said this before to other forums, is that we need to seize the momentum, right? So what happened this summer with George Floyd, you know, I spoke at a rally and people are angry about that. And so we can't wait 4 years, 6 years, 8 years. We need to seize the momentum and work on the criminal justice reform efforts right now. So I think those are paramount. And again, even Medicaid expansion, we need to make sure it's properly funded. So I think that would be paramount.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? For hands.
Yes,
Oh, is Alice? Is that Alice's voice?
yes.
Okay,
Am I on
Alice.
Okay. So a large part of what elected officials do is deal with resources and budgets. During this year of the pandemic, there was some federal funding, the CARES money that went to Missouri and then other places. According to what I've read, only 8% of CARES funding went to local health departments, the 100 local health departments around the state. The state health department instead chose their allotment of funds to keep most of it for the state health department. Could you address getting those resources out again on the local level to where they're needed? Because there will be more in the current stimulus, I'm sure.
Okay, Mr. Smith, you're the first to go this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the problems we've had getting access to this money. And you know, the governor has held up money recently that was supposed to be released. I know even in regards to education. So that's where the fight is, because this money's coming in and it's getting held up. So, and I think people need to be aware of that, like federal funds. And so I think that's something that, you know, you have to be vocal about it and to make sure that that's done. I mean, you know, the budget committee is, you know, a lot of that, those issues are run through the budget committee. So it would be like any other effort, is just making sure that your colleagues know that we need the money and it needs to be released. That's a problem. I mean, especially when you've got a governor that's holding on to funds. I know that just recently, I think a few weeks ago, he released a lot of funds that he was sitting on. So I think that's a problem. And I think it's inappropriate that money's coming in and it's not going to the right place. So I think it'd be as if any other issue, you just have to lean on the budget committee. If I was on the budget committee, obviously it'd be a lot easier to do it, to deal with the issue. But we need to make sure that the funds are distributed. And I think we're getting I think it's around $50 million because of the stimulus package. So about 50 million is coming in to our area. I would like to have a role in making sure that's getting distributed to the right places, if I could, because there's a lot of money coming. I mean, we're talking about a huge amount of money that Missouri is going to see, and I think that's going to be a fight to make sure that it goes to the right places. But I would like to have an active role in that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Nielsen?
Yes, there's a lot of money coming in through the stimulus, a lot of money printing going on. And, you know, people are going to fight about how that gets distributed. You know, I can't say which is better, whether the reasons the state has it is better than the local government. You have to see what their reasoning is behind that. Obviously, the efforts are occurring more at the local level, at the state level. So it would seem logical that more of the money would have to go down to the local level. Thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions?
This is Mari, if there's no one else ahead of me.
Mari. Okay, Mari.
My question has to do with, it's kind of unusual that we hear from two candidates, either of whom, if elected, would be a member of the minority party or would not be in the majority party in the legislature. So same question applies to both of you. How do you see the role in this day and age of a super majority Republican legislature? What do you see as the role of the minority party, and how would you go about trying to function effectively within that environment, which can be very frustrating?
Okay, Mr. Nielsen?
Thank you. That's a very good question, and one very appropriate for me, I think, because I would be a minority of one. But also, I would be someone that isn't tied to one side or the other. So it would give me more freedom to be innovative, to question assumptions, to make suggestions that perhaps neither party have considered. And also, it gives me an opportunity to perhaps understand one side's issues so well that I can relate them well to the other side. I think I have my foot in both camps in some ways, although libertarians are known for having very strict positions on freedom and liberty on both sides of the spectrum, both economically and on civil liberties. So I think I might be someone that could bridge that gap a little bit because I kind of have my foot in both camps. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Smith.
Thank you. That's an excellent question, a $1 million question, if you will. Well, you know, I think primarily it's about building relationships. You have to work with people. You know, there are some people you're just not going to be able to work with, but you have to find the people that you can work with. Not everyone down there. I mean, sometimes when you look at the map and you see Missouri red, you think everyone's this far right extremist. That's not the case. Yes, you have those, but I think you have a lot of people in the middle or center right that you can work with and that you can get things done with, and people that will listen. As an attorney, I deal with people all the time. I have local prosecutors. I deal with prosecutors way out in rural areas that I have to deal with and reach an agreement on, right? I go to these rural areas and you just have to find common ground. Most people have usually some degree of common sense, and you can communicate with them and get that done. As long as you're willing to work with people. Just an interesting story, so not only about my campaign, but about my background. So I went to Tulane Law School. I decided I was gonna run for class president. Now, I went to law school in Louisiana. There's classmates down there that are still upset about the Civil War, about the South losing the Civil War. And I'm not joking. And I just a normal conversation, it's still an issue. And I ran for class president, and I was probably, one of, as far as personal people of color, not that very many, maybe 25 students. My class had over 330. I went around and tried to get nominated to run for this, and people looked at me like I was crazy. But the sentiment was always this: it was, I'll vote for you, but I don't think the other guy will. I'll vote for you, but I don't think the other person will. And I noticed there was a trend of that. I'll vote for you because I know you and I like you, but that table's not going to vote for you. Why end up winning? Because I think people knew me. You didn't have to put a D behind your name for that or an R. It was just who you were. And so the more that people get to know you and the more you can build relationships, I think you can shape policy. You're going to have to get co-sponsors of bills, of course. I mean, this isn't Pollyanna, but you can shape policy if you build relationships. But great question.
Okay, I see. It says Diane's iPad, that you're leaving your hand, sir. I don't know who you are. Oh, you're not raising your hand. Okay.
Schuler, by the way.
Oh, that's it's Diane Schuler's iPad. Okay. Anybody raising their hand, if they do, raise it. And okay, Herb can be depended upon.
What committees in the House will you let it be known you'd most like to serve upon?
Okay, Mr. Smith, you go first.
That's a good question. I probably want to do the Judiciary Committee just because of my legal background. I think I could add a lot to that committee. One of the problems we have here normally in Missouri, and as a practicing attorney, is the statutes are very poorly written. And there's nothing worse than getting ready to go into court, or you're trying to deal with a prosecutor, you look at the statute and you're like, this doesn't make a lot of sense. So they just keep throwing things in there where as a practicing attorney, it's very difficult to work with what's coming out of Jefferson City. So the Judiciary Committee, I think, would give me an ability to kind of be a stopgap against bad legislation that affects all of us, especially when you're dealing with criminal justice issues. This is something I've been thinking about and talking with people about. There's a higher education committee, and I might tend to want to get involved in that committee because of Mizzou, and I'm representing the university. But I've talked to different people and other legislators, and the sense I get is they're not doing a lot of substantive work. So it sounds like it would be a good committee to be on, but I'm not sure that would be the best committee because I don't know that they're as effective as you might think. There's I guess it's Children and Families Committee. That's something that I've considered because I think that children need to be taken care of and protected in the state. So that's something that I've also looked at. The criminal justice type committees that I might look at, it just depends on, a lot of it's going to depend on the important legislation that's moving at the time, because if elected, I would have a few weeks before the term ends. So I kind of want to get a feel for who the new players are going to be and where I could make the most impact. But definitely Judiciary Committee would probably be at the top of my list because I think that's always substantive.
Thank you. Mr. Nielsen?
Thank you. That's a very good question. I'd like to be involved in criminal justice issues, also on issues of banking and finance and insurance. One of the issues that I would like to see proposed in the state of Missouri is to follow what Wyoming has done. Wyoming has been a trendsetter for passing legislation to enable the good regulations for banking and especially financial technical companies, or what they call fintech companies. Also to encourage those companies for startups for financial instruments like cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. And so I would like to see Missouri move forward with that so we can try to encourage those type of startups or those type of businesses move here, because with disruption to the economy, there are a lot of businesses, especially in California, that are looking to relocate out of a high regulation, high tax state like California. So I'd like to see us encourage economic policies that would lead to growth. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Wiley,
Let's see what he has first.
you have to unmute yourself there.
Yes, I had to get unmuted there. The state has a relatively long history of reducing revenue, certainly reducing taxes. And as a consequence, the state doesn't have the funding it needs to fund the programs and services throughout the state. That includes the university, of course. What ideas do you have about enhancing state revenue?
Okay, Mr. Nielsen?
Well, there are two sides to that question. One is enhancing state revenue. The other side is what can be done about spending. In my opinion, I mean, the universities have been on a very fat budget because of all of the money that has been made available through student loans. It's so easy to get student loans in a lot of students going to school that they haven't had to really tighten their budget much. And so I would look to find more ways to reduce spending and reduce regulations rather than increase taxes. And in fact, one of the things that we might do to encourage more business development and more companies to move to Missouri is, do you know that the corporate income tax is only 1% of state revenues? Why not eliminate it? Let's get that out of the way, get rid of all that bureaucracy and all that paperwork, and let businesses worry about providing good premium goods and services rather than filing their taxes. And at the same time, get rid of business tax credits. There's no reason to play favorites with businesses giving them tax credits. So thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Smith?
Yeah, that's a good question. And one of the problems as well with that is that we just have a legislature that even when they have the money, they don't want it, they don't want to appropriate it to the right places, right? So there's a lot of services that need the money, and that's a constant battle. Even, you know, you talk about services for people with disabilities, they can't get the proper funding. There's wait lists to get into some of these housing units just because the funding isn't there to help them. So the funding is $1 million issue. One is getting the funding, but second is the distribution of the funding. There's actually a surplus in many areas. So, you know, the money should be there to pay for a lot of things, just getting the legislature to move on those issues. There are places you can increase taxes. I mean, you don't want to, you know, obviously taxes can't go to zero, but I'll tell you, I own a business and I started the business from the ground up 15 years ago. So I don't know that, you know, lots and lots of taxes is always the way forward because it bars entry into business development and for companies to start up. I would like to just encourage the growth of small businesses because, you know, I can tell you as owning a business, I know Scott Crystal is on and, you know, he owns a business as well. I mean, when your business prospers, now you're hiring a copy company to run the copy machines, and then you're hiring a paper company to provide paper, and then you're hiring other people. So if we can enhance business development and provide incentives for businesses to come to this area, as well as, I mean, even statewide, and allow businesses to grow, I think that helps everybody because there's just more overall tax revenue. So the encouragement of business growth responsibly, of course. I mean, you don't want businesses that are going to hurt the environment or cause a lot of problems to the infrastructure. But I would say plans to encourage business growth because that's going to increase tax revenues, which is going to provide more money all around. But then again, you have that second piece, which is making sure the legislature is going to release those funds to where it needs to go.
I saw Al Plummer's hand up earlier, so it's time for Al.
Yes, congratulations to both candidates. We're glad that you were able to join us this afternoon. At one time, the state of Missouri had one of the best state civil rights acts in the country. Up until a few years ago, the current majority decided to destroy that. I was wondering if either of you feel it's important enough to pursue a restoration of that civil rights law. It's Chapter 213. And if so, what do you think could be done to get the ball rolling?
Mr. Smith, you're first up now.
That's a great question, Mr. Plummer, and I appreciate you asking it. And this kind of goes back to what I've mentioned before about kind of the assault we're under. It's not just that we're a minority party here, or that we're in a super minority, but the majority is being very, very, very aggressive. You mentioned civil rights in Missouri, Chapter 236. So I think we would have to continue to fight against that. Maybe, again, the problem in a super minority, you're going to have to find some common ground to get people on board, especially when you're talking about employment discrimination, right? Because that's what we've seen at the workplace. It's an excellent question, because what's happened is they've raised the threshold for proof to when you say you're discriminated against, right? So now it's almost ridiculous where what you have to prove discrimination, it's a joke. So that's just part of this whole tidal wave of bad legislation that's hurting people, and it's hurt good lawyers who are trying to help people, and then they're kind of pushed out of the practice, or it makes it more difficult for them because they can't afford to do it because you can't win the cases. And especially with some of those civil rights employment cases, they're very labor intensive, especially paper heavy. So it requires a lot of work. Now you've made it a harder threshold to prove that there's damages or that you've been discriminated. So I think it's like anything else. You're going to have to have some common ground. But
Oh, you're muted, Mr. Smith. We can't hear you. You accent.
Okay. All right. You heard the beginning of the question, my answer, right? I wasn't muted the whole time.
Yes.
Okay. Al, this is important, and I've said this before, and I think we need to seize upon this, and maybe it's for a longer discussion. But because of what happened this summer, because of George Floyd, that was so powerful. 97% of Americans believed that what happened was wrong. When in American history do you have 97% of everyone agreeing that killing was wrong? And so I think and I've been blown away with this crime bill that's moving through the Senate. It's getting bipartisan support from law enforcement. Everyone. So we need to seize on the momentum from the summer to try to work on. But now's the time, Al. We can't wait 5 years. If we're going to get on, it has to be.
Great.
Well, Mr. Nielsen, where are you? Oh, there you are. Mr. Nielsen.
Thank you. I agree that we need to build on the momentum from the summer. The issue of civil rights with regards to law enforcement is the highest priority right now, and one that has to be addressed while the iron is hot. There are so many things that can be done to improve the situation. Yes, there are a few bills going through the state legislature right now regarding the use of force that should get passed. Also, I believe there's one on police accountability, making sure that you have the proper data to judge whether there's been any abuse, and to make sure that those officers fired for cause cannot get rehired. But there are so many more things that can be done. One of the ideas of making sure that you have, the police are the default responders when you call 911. And there are so many situations where the police are not the best responder because they are not trained to handle people that are emotionally disturbed or have mental health issues. And all too often, those situations can end up badly. So I think we need to move towards another modality for answering emergency calls for professionals that can handle situations where the police are not the best
Yes,
responders
sir.
because they are trained to use force.
I'll call him back. Thank you. Bye.
And in addition to that, you have to look at things like bail reform. You know, someone sitting in jail because they can't pay their bail, then they can't make it to their job the next morning, and then they get fired. That doesn't help the family situation. You know, so we have to look at bail reform, prison sentence reform. There are so many areas all across the criminal justice system where things could be improved to improve everybody's life. Thank you.
And we only have 5 minutes left according to my watch. And so I'd like to, I know there are other questions now. Maybe you could ask them later, but I would like to at least have the final wrap-ups from the two candidates. And we started the opening with Mr. Nielsen, so we'll start the wrap-up with Mr. Smith, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. And again, thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be here. Thank you to Mr. Nielsen for participating. You know, we're really in a state of crisis right now. And I know we've been in the minority party for a while in Jefferson City, but I have never seen anything quite like this as far as the legislation that's cascading down. Because not only are we in the minority, but the majority is being super aggressive on all fronts. And we need to push back on a lot of bad legislation. You know, I understand the needs of this city. I grew up in Columbia. You know, you talk about criminal justice reform. I know what it's like to be pulled over by the police. I've been pulled over by the police. I know that fear. I've got children. I know what it's like to be pulled over when you have kids in the car. As a criminal defense attorney, I work daily on criminal justice issues where people aren't getting bails or they're not getting bonds. And you have for offenses that are relatively minor. And you get them out of jail a lot of times and the case is dismissed because it wasn't even a good case. And I see the disparity with income. When people's families have money, they can bond out. When people are poor, they can't. So I know firsthand in my work, not only my background being pulled over, but also my work in the community as a defense attorney, dealing with these issues and seeing these issues and having hands-on these issues firsthand. But we've got to push back on so much of this legislation. It's an utter assault, and it's really a crisis. I mean, this is, especially, and you're talking about voter suppression. We could talk all day just about that issue. The fact that the majority is trying to take away the right to vote. So we need to be involved. We need to stay active, not only for the candidates, not only, you know, if elected, once I get down there, but as a group, as a community, we need to continue to push back against this legislation that's hurting all of the citizens and is bad. It's just this legislation that's coming down is just bad for democracy. But I'm optimistic, and I think if we seize on the momentum from the summer, we can get things done. We have to establish relationships, and we have to be able to work with people. Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Mr. Nielsen?
Well, thank you so much for having me here today to the Muleskinners. Thank you, Mr. Smith, for engaging this forum with me. It's been, I've enjoyed it a great deal. And I think obviously this isn't my audience here, very likely, but I hope that at least on some of the ideas regarding criminal justice reform and some of the economic ideas that you're open to them and consider them, and maybe that will add to the debate going forward. And once again, it just really, really encouraged me, the popular unrest, the protests from the summer, because as a libertarian, I'm someone who has followed these issues for a very long time as a libertarian. And it's just some of the cases of police abuse are just heart-wrenching, like what happened to George Floyd. And there just has to be a better way. There just has to be a better way. And I hope Missouri can move forward with a much more than what they're considering right now. And so once again, thank you for having me here. It's been a pleasure. Give me a little bit of practice for the forums to come, and you all have a great day.
Well, thank you. And well, I will turn this over to our president now.
Thank you, Leslie. Appreciate it. Thank you for moderating. I appreciate both of the candidates being here, sharing your ideas and thoughts, and letting us get a chance to get to know you. So I appreciate that. I think Leslie mentioned that there might have been another hand or two other people wanting to chat. We're going to officially close our meeting now. I've got 1:15, so we're going to officially close. The Zoom will be up. So if y'all want us to